Welcome to part 9 of why we need to move the tough conversations faster. Now, this is a bonus episode because at first I didn't include this in the initial planning out of this series, but the more I talk about it and work with my clients, the more I want to double click on this one piece of the framework that I think is absolutely essential. It's absolutely important that we stop making up stories. We're in conversations, we assume, we understand, and we know what the other person believes. We've all been there. We've all been in a tough, tense situation where we're in that conversation. It's hard. We are making all these assumptions. And before we know it, we've gone down a rabbit hole of making up all these things about the other person. Most of the times, they're assumptions. Most of the times, they're wrong. We have to resist this urge to make up stories about what the other person thinks, believes, or what's happening for them, how we even understand the situation. We need to move away from assumptions and stick with those things that are indisputable. When we lean in to these stories we make up, we create unnecessary conflict, drama, confusion. And I want to talk to you about why it's so important that we avoid this habit that's so easy to fall into. So the first thing I want to think about is why stories don't work when we're having these conversations, why the stories we make up don't work. They often are incomplete or based on incomplete information. We fill in the gaps of what's happening. So in those stories, we take something and they're based on our experiences, our fears, and our insecurities. It's not based on what the other person is having. It's not fair to the other person to make up these stories because we don't have all information. It's often based on incomplete information. So that's number one. Number two, when we make up these stories, it often increases or escalates a conflict. It does nothing to reduce conflict because especially when we tell people what's happening for this world or we state those stories as facts, the other person gets defensive and it simply seems to escalate the situation. It does not de-escalate the situation and get you on a plane of cool problem solving the situation. Instead, you want to focus on those things that are indisputable. We respond to the story we created in our own heads because we think of it as being absolutely true when most of the times we made it up. So you really want to lean into those things that are indisputable and avoid getting trapped in the stories we made up. They're not helpful. The third thing that happens is once we lean into those stories that we made up, it shuts down collaboration. When we're having these hard conversations, we want to do everything we can to make sure that we are listening to understand the other person. Often when we buy into these stories, we stop listening because we bought into a story that we made up and the story isn't. So it shuts down collaboration. It shuts down the possibility to cool problem solve with the other person. So you want to make sure you avoid these 3 simple things around how we get caught in making up stories. Now, one of the fun ways I thought we could kind of explore how stories get in the way of us having productive conversations is by me giving you a couple examples. So example number 1 has to do with the imaginary promotion. So now think about this. Imagine you're working with a colleague and suddenly they start avoiding you. They're quiet in meetings and you notice they're emailing your boss more often. You think, hey, they must be gunning for my promotion. They must be trying to push me out. So you confront that person and it turns out they weren't avoiding you at all. They've been taking care of a sick parent and emailing the boss to adjust their workload. That's an example of how easily our assumptions get in the way. So you want to stop assuming motives, intent, and you want to start to ask questions and listen instead. Example number 2, I like to call this one, missing the lunch invitation. Now imagine you see a colleague post photos from a lunch you were not invited to. And the story in your head is, they don't like me, I'm the odd one out and they're out to get me. You stew in this, you sit in it, and you get all upset. Only to find out later that they thought you couldn't make it because you said in the meeting that you were swamped this afternoon, so they didn't bother to invite you because they assumed you were busy. People aren't always thinking about you as much as you think they are. And sometimes when we make up these stories, we can get ourselves into real trouble because we don't know what the truth is. So we want to really stick to those things that are indisputable. And the final example I want to give is I need a new business partner. So I want you to go down an imaginary lane with me. Now, suppose you pitch an idea to your business partner in a meeting, and that person doesn't say a word. Not a nod, not a smile, nothing. The story in your head might be, oh my goodness, they hate my idea. They're probably planning to scrap it and embarrass me in front of the team. So you pull them aside later and you're ready to fight. You're ready to confront them. And when you ask them about it, you ask them, why were you silent? Why didn't you give me any feedback about the idea that I pitched to you? They might say something like, hey, I love the idea. The reason I was silent is I was trying to figure out how we can make it work. And we made up an entire story about their silence. So their silence doesn't always mean disapproval. It could mean that they're just simply thinking about the idea. So you want to really make sure you avoid this trap of making up stories, because I've seen it go quite awry in many, many contexts. So if you want to stop making up stories, there are 3 things that you could focus on. You want to check your facts is number 1. So what do you actually know and what are you assuming? Number 2, you want to ask open-ended questions. Instead of assuming, I noticed you've been quiet about my idea, you ask, what's on your mind? And 3rd, you want to acknowledge your own narrative. Often, the stories we make up are driven by our own insecurities and past experiences. The story I told myself was that you were upset with me. Is that true? Often you find out that's not true. You might learn that, hey, my girlfriend broke up with me last night and I'm not ready to talk about it. There are a million reasons why people might be responding the way they are. And we need to really fall out of this trap or not get into the trap of making up stories. Here's the takeaway. The stories we often make up are often less accurate and more harmful than what is actually going on. We want to focus on those things that are indisputable and stay curious. We want to avoid unnecessary tension and create space for real solutions. Create space where we join problem solve with the people who we're working with, who we're collaborating with. And whenever you fall into this trap of making up stories, just remember you're not alone. We all do it. Most of us have fallen into this trap. But hopefully you can use the tools that I've shared to help you get back on track. So you focus on the things that will move the conversation forward. I want to thank you for watching this. And remember, better conversations don't just improve your business. They transform your relationships and your life. I hope you enjoyed this series on why we need to move to tough conversations fast.